Let's fill out the 2024 U.S. Senate map based on the latest polls. Democrats are tasked with defending 23 of the 34 Senate seats up for election this November, including 8 of the 10 most competitive races and 3 seats in states that Donald Trump carried in both 2016 and 2020. This makes the 2024 Senate map highly favorable for Republicans. According to Decision Desk HQ's latest forecast, Republicans have a 71% chance of flipping the majority. And over on BetOnline, the prediction markets have Republicans favored at negative 350, which translates to a slightly better 75 to 80% chance of retaking control. Now let's dive into the latest polls across the most competitive Senate races to see if Republicans are on track to get the job done. With that said, let's start by filling out the safe seats for both parties, where their chance of winning is greater than 95%. For the Democrats, this includes Washington, California, and Hawaii, as well as New Mexico, Minnesota, New York, Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, and Virginia. Most of these states are also expected to vote for Kamala Harris by at least a 10-point margin at the top of the ticket. The only exceptions are Virginia and Minnesota. But in Minnesota, Democratic incumbent Amy Klobuchar is a proven electoral powerhouse, having been reelected in 2018 with 60% of the vote, and she has never lost a race by less than 20 points. Similarly, in Virginia, Democratic Senator Tim Kaine won by 16 points in 2018 and has led his Republican challenger by double digits in every 2024 poll thus far. Now, with these 14 safe states providing Democrats with a solid foundation at 42 Senate seats, it's hard to imagine them ending up with fewer than this number once all the votes are counted. On the Republican side, their safe states include North Dakota, Wyoming, and Utah, along with Nebraska's special election, Missouri, Tennessee, Mississippi, West Virginia, and Indiana. These are all solidly Republican states at the presidential level, with no unique factors making them competitive in this cycle. Notably, West Virginia will be a flip, as Democratic incumbent Senator Joe Manchin is retiring, paving the way for GOP Governor Jim Justice to win by a landslide in November in this Trump plus 40 states. You may also have noticed that I did not place Nebraska's regular election down as safe Republican. That's because a number of polls have come out recently showing independent candidate Dan Osborne within the margin of error, or even outright leading Republican incumbent Senator Deb Fischer, who is pretty unpopular even within her own party. I would still be shocked if Fischer went down, but there's more than enough uncertainty here at this point to hold off on a rating here until we get to the likely states. Now, with those solid Republican seats lifting the GOP to 47 total, they are just 3 seats shy of a potential majority, which they could reach if Donald Trump defeats Kamala Harris in the presidential race. In that case, his running mate J.D. Vance would cast the tie-breaking vote in the Senate. However, even if Trump were to lose, Republicans would still only need to win 4 of the remaining 11 contested races to secure a majority that would hold regardless of the presidential outcome. Of the remaining races, 5 are in states Trump won in 2020, while 5 more are in states that Biden narrowly won by less than 3 points. With that in mind, it's essential to recognize the decline of split-ticket voting over the last decade. Currently, only 5 U.S. senators represent states that were carried by the opposite party's presidential candidate in the last election. This is a significant drop from more than 20 such senators just 12 years ago. Voters are increasingly less likely to support candidates from different parties for different offices, which amplifies the challenge Democrats face in trying to retain their narrow 51 to 49 majority in the Senate. Let's now get to these more 11 competitive races and assign them a rating based simply on the latest poll. For a more detailed look at each race beyond just the polls, check out the video that just popped up on the top right-hand corner of your screen. We'll go by order of poll closing time, starting in Ohio, where the polls will close at 7:30 p.m. on the East Coast. Democratic incumbent Sherrod Brown is seeking a 4th term against Republican Bernie Moreno, a businessman. Brown is something of an anomaly in today's political landscape, managing to stay in office in what is now a strongly Republican-leaning state due to his broad cross-party appeal. He won re-election in the 2018 midterms by 8 percentage points, while the state's gubernatorial race went to Republican Mike DeWine by 4 points. However, that was a Democratic wave year without the presidential race on the ballot. Donald Trump carried Ohio by 8 points in the 2020 presidential election and is expected to do so again this November. To win, Brown will likely need to overperform Kamala Harris by at least 8 points. Brown will benefit from the fact that his opponent, Moreno, was viewed as the least electable candidate in the Republican primary, but secured the nomination with Trump's endorsements. The latest poll from YouGov and Bowling Green University shows Brown leading by 4 points among 1,000 likely voters surveyed between September 18th and 27th, which is consistent with the overall polling average, where Brown holds a 2-point lead. He has led in all but 2 polls going all the way back to June. So back on our map here, Ohio will lean in favor of Brown and the Democrats. As you'll soon see here, this is going to be a must-win race for the party to have any shot at retaining the majority. Next, at the 8 o'clock hour, polls will close in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Florida. Let's begin with the Keystone States. Pennsylvania is the most critical battleground on the presidential map, but its Senate race hasn't received nearly as much attention considering the incumbent Democrat Bob Casey Jr. is running for re-election, and he's considered one of the strongest candidates for the either party. Since his first statewide election as state auditor in 1996, Casey hasn't lost a race by less than 9 points. In his most recent election in 2018, he won by 13 points. However, the 2024 Senate race is shaping up to be closer. The latest poll from On Message Inc. shows Casey leading Republican nominee Dave McCormick by just 1 point among 800 likely voters. This is tighter than the average of polls throughout the cycle, where Casey has led by around 3.7% across 86 surveys. Casey's strength in prior cycles may have been bolstered by favorable environments for his party, and right now he's only outperforming Kamala Harris by about 3 points, which is less than some other Democratic Senate candidates in similar battleground states. With all that said, on our map, Pennsylvania tilts blue for Casey and the Democratic Party for now. As for the state of Maryland, this is typically one of the bluest states in the nation, having voted for Biden by 33 percentage points in 2020, his third best performance in the country. Maryland hasn't elected a Republican to the Senate in more than 40 years. However, with the retirement of the Democratic incumbent and the Republicans nominating former Governor Larry Hogan, this race has become far more interesting than usual. Hogan has won 2 statewide elections as a Republican in Maryland and left office in 2023 as one of the most popular governors in the country, boasting nearly 80% approval, a remarkable feat in today's polarized political environment. His entry into the race has raised concerns for Democrats. Their nominee, Angela Alsobrooks, isn't considered a particularly strong or weak candidate, but the latest poll from the University of Maryland still shows Alsobrooks leading by 11 points among more than 1,000 likely voters surveyed from September 19th to 23rd. Ultimately, Hogan faces near impossible odds, likely needing to overperform Trump's numbers in Maryland by around 30 points. A single-digit loss would still be a really strong showing for him. On our Senate map, Maryland remains in the safe blue column, with Alsobrooks holding a double-digit lead. Finally, let's head down to the Sunshine States. Republican incumbent Rick Scott is seeking a second term in Florida after first winning by an incredibly narrow margin in 2018. He unseated then-incumbent Democrat Bill Nelson by just 0.2%, with a raw vote margin of only about 10,000 votes out of over 8 million cast. The 2024 race was initially expected to be less competitive, as Florida has shifted decisively to the right in recent years. For example, incumbent Republicans Governor Ron DeSantis and Senator Marco Rubio were re-elected by more than 15 points each in the 2022 midterms. However, in 2024, the race is a bit tighter than anticipated. According to the latest poll from RMG Research, Scott leads his Democratic challenger, former Congresswoman Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, by 6 points among 774 likely voters. This is a more comfortable lead for Scott than his overall average, which shows him up by just 2.8% across 26 polls. I'd personally predict Scott to win by closer to 5 or 6 points, or possibly more, and based on the latest poll, Florida leans Republican on our map. All right, that wraps up the 8 p.m. closings. 7 states remain without a designation, and currently Republicans are projected to win 48 Senate seats, with Democrats at 45. Fast forwarding to 9 o'clock now as polls close in all but Montana and Nevada. Before we dig into them, just a quick reminder. Less than 20% of you are subscribed. Take a second to click that red button below. It's completely free and helps me out a ton. Thanks a lot. In Michigan, incumbent Democrat Debbie Stabenow is retiring, setting up the first open race for this seat since 1994, which happens to also be the last time Republicans won a Senate race in Michigan. Along with Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, Michigan is part of the core Rust Belt trio that is likely to decide the 2024 presidential race. Decision Desk HQ's latest poll average has Harris leading Trump by less than half a point, 0.2%, based on 42 polls. Now the question in the Senate race is to what extent Democratic nominee Alyssa Slotkin will outperform Harris against Republican nominee Mike Rogers, a former congressman himself. Both candidates are strong recruits for their respective parties, but it's Slotkin who is consistently outrunning Harris in the polls. The most recent of which, by Mitchell Research, has Slotkin up 5 points among 709 likely voters surveyed on September 30th. Slotkin is at 49%, Rogers 44% in this poll. So here on our map, it joins Ohio in the lean Democrat column. Over in Wisconsin, Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin is running for a third term after her resounding 11-point re-election victory in 2018. Wisconsin remains a highly competitive state at the presidential level, having been decided by less than a point in both the 2016 and 2020 elections. However, at the Senate level, Baldwin is expected to run ahead of the Democratic presidential ticket, similar to Alyssa Slotkin in Michigan and other Democratic incumbents on this map. The latest survey from Marquette University, a trusted pollster in Wisconsin, supports that view, showing Baldwin leading Republican nominee Eric Hovde by 6 points in a 4-candidate race, with Baldwin at 51% and Hovde at 45%. This survey included 798 likely voters polled between September 18th and 26th. The overall polling average shows Baldwin with a 4-point lead across 50 polls. Notably, no poll so far this cycle has shown Hovde leading. On our map, Wisconsin joins the lean Democratic column. Next up is Nebraska. As we touched on earlier, several recent polls have shown an unexpectedly close race between incumbent Republican Deb Fischer and independent candidate Osborne, with some even showing Osborne leading at times. However, many of those surveys have strong ties to the Osborne campaign. For example, the Bullfinch Group survey was sponsored by the Independent Center, an organization dedicated to electing independent candidates, and the Survey USA poll was directly sponsored by Osborne for Nebraska. The latest non-Osborne affiliated survey from back in late August was conducted by Global Strategy Group and polled 600 likely voters between August 26th and 29th. In that survey, Fischer held a narrow 1-point lead at 43% to Osborne's 42%. So Nebraska's regular election will simply tilt Republican here on our map. Down in Texas, incumbent Senator Ted Cruz is running for a third term after narrowly defeating Democrat Beto O'Rourke by less than 3 percentage points in the 2018 midterms, making it the closest Senate contest in Texas since 1978. Cruz should face a somewhat easier race this November, largely thanks to Trump's coattails, as the former president leads Harris by almost 6 points right now, similar to his 2020 margin. That being said, like in Florida, the Senate polls in Texas have narrowed over the past month. The latest one, conducted by Emerson College, shows Cruz up by 4 points over Democratic nominee Congressman Colin Allred among 860 likely voters surveyed between September 22nd and 24th. The overall average, based on 33 polls, has Cruz ahead by just over 3 points, with 48.1% to Allred's 45%. The gap has clearly shrunk in recent months, as shown on the timeline graph. On our map, Texas moves into the lean Republican category, bringing the GOP's projected seat count to 50, which would be enough for a majority should Trump defeat Harris in the presidential race. On the other side, Democrats would need to sweep the remaining states and hold the White House to maintain a 50-50 split in the Senate. Let's wrap up the 9 p.m. closing with Arizona. another key battleground at both the presidential and Senate levels. Incumbent independent Senator Kirsten Sinema isn't running for re-election, setting up a two-way race between Democratic Congressman Ruben Gallego, 2022 Republican gubernatorial nominee Kari Lake. Arizona was traditionally a Republican stronghold, but Democrats have won 5 consecutive major statewide races here, including the 2020 presidential race where Biden was victorious by 0.3%, and each of the last 3 Senate elections. The latest poll from Insider Advantage shows Gallego leading Lake by 7 percentage points, with 49.6% to Lake's 43.1%, based on a survey of 800 likely voters between September 29th and 30th. This is a surprisingly wide margin for such a competitive state, but it aligns with the overall average, where Gallego leads by more than 7 points across 64 polls. Notably, Lake hasn't led in any survey since July. On our map, Arizona will go in the likely Democratic column based on Gallego's strong 7-point lead, so that keeps Democrats in the fight here with just 2 states to go. Both Montana and Nevada will close precincts at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Let's start in Nevada, where we have another key battleground at both the presidential and Senate levels. Incumbent Democrat Jackie Rosen, first elected during the 2018 Blue Wave, won by 5% over then-incumbent Republican Senator Dean Heller. Now she is running for re-election in right-trending Nevada, a state that remains one of the most purple in the country. While Joe Biden won the state by 2.4 percentage points in 2020, this mirrored the margin Hillary Clinton secured in 2016, indicating a rightward shift relative to the national trend. Republicans followed up by flipping the governor's office in 2022. The latest poll from Remington Research Group shows Rosen leading her GOP opponent, U.S. Army veteran Sam Brown, by 6 points among 800 likely voters surveyed between September 16th and 20th. Rosen has consistently led or tied with Brown in every poll this cycle, often by wide margins. Back on our Senate map, Nevada will be likely Democratic, with Rosen favored to retain her seat. That means it all comes down to Montana, a highly watched contest between incumbent Democratic Senator Jon Tester and Republican challenger Tim Sheehy. Tester, like Sherrod Brown in Ohio, has won re-election twice in deep red Montana due to his broad appeal across the political spectrum, but this year presents his toughest challenge yet. With Trump expected to carry Montana by at least 15 points in November, Tester faces a steep hill. While he managed to outperform Barack Obama by 18% in 2012, replicating that success in the more polarized 2024 environment will be difficult. The latest poll, released by Remington Research Group, shows Sheehy leading Tester by 8 points, 52% to 44%, among 800 likely voters surveyed between September 16th and 20th. I've started to notice fewer and fewer polls coming out of this race here as Montana appears less and less competitive. Democrats have begun redirecting resources to states like Texas and Florida, recognizing that their chances of reaching 50 Senate seats hinge on holding Montana or flipping one of those 2 states. Based on this most recent poll, Montana will be rated likely Republican for Sheehy and the GOP. This completes our 2024 U.S. Senate map projection, with Republicans expected to flip the majority with 51 seats to the Democrats' 49. That does it for today's video, though. Shout out to my channel members in the description below. Make sure to subscribe to my channel down below, and please leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it. You can check out more content from my channel here, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.